Somewhere out there, someone is going on a first date tonight, and they have absolutely no idea what they're walking into. These are the stories of the ones who did. The blind dates that became nightmares, the charming strangers who turned obsessive, the narrow escapes that left people shaking for years. I'm Creepy Nick, and tonight, we're swiping right on terror. My boyfriend had his car broken into while he was parked outside a grocery store. His wallet was stolen ID, credit cards, everything. He filed a police report, but the officer who took it was practically yawning. There'd been a string of thefts in the area, he said. No one was actively investigating. It was, for all intents and purposes, a dead end. We moved on. Life went back to normal. 7 months passed. Then my phone rang. The man on the other end had a calm, professional voice. The kind of voice that makes you sit up straight without knowing why. He introduced himself as a detective and explained that a pile of stolen wallets had been found dumped in a trash bin near a highway rest stop. My boyfriend's was in the pile. They'd tried calling him using the number on his driver's license, but couldn't get through. He'd switched numbers about halfway through those 7 months. But here's the part that made my stomach tighten. Inside the wallet, the detective said, there was a photo of me. A little passport-sized picture I'd given my boyfriend ages ago, one I absolutely hated. But for some reason, he loved carrying around. And tucked in with everything else was my business card, the one with my work photo printed right on it. So he called me instead. He was very polite, very reasonable. He explained that the station holding the wallet was a 2-hour drive from my town and suggested as a courtesy that we meet at a small cafe just outside the city, right off the main road. I recognized the place immediately. A dingy little coffee shop that barely seemed open most days, isolated, the kind of place that looks empty even when it isn't. And something about that made every nerve in my body stand up at once. I kept turning the details over in my mind. Why a cafe? Why not just leave it at the nearest precinct for my boyfriend to collect? Why reach out to me at all instead of continuing to try his number? None of it made sense. None of it added up. I told him I appreciated the effort. Said that if the wallet had been found, he could leave it at the station and I'd arrange to pick it up myself. He pushed back a little, insisted it would be easier this way. That sent a cold feeling through my chest, that insistence, that little tug of pressure. I declined again, politely, and I hung up. Then, I called the station he'd named. I explained the situation, the stolen wallets, the rest stop, my boyfriend's ID. The person on the other end confirmed it immediately. Yes, a collection of wallets had been found. Yes, my boyfriend's was among them. But when I mentioned the part about an officer offering to meet me privately at a cafe, the tone on the other end of the line changed. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said carefully that no officer would ever make such a request, that the wallet could only be retrieved by its owner, directly from the station, in person. I sat there holding the phone after the call ended, and the cold feeling spread from my chest all the way down into my hands. Someone had gone through that wallet, had studied my face in that photo, had found my business card and used it to get my number, and had built a story convincing enough, professional enough, to lure me to a quiet, half-empty cafe on a road outside the city. I keep thinking about what would have been waiting for me there. I don't know who that man was. I don't know what he wanted. I only know that whatever it was, I'm glad I'll never find out. I trusted my gut that day, and I think my gut saved my life. Some predators are patient. They wait for the right photograph to fall into their hands, the right name on a business card, and then they build their trap one polite phone call at a time. The woman in our next story didn't face a calculated stranger. She faced something almost more unsettling, a man who thought his cruelty was charming. This submission comes from a 22-year-old who thought the worst part of her evening was already behind her. she was wrong. Some people you can sense are wrong for you the second you meet them. Other people take a little longer to reveal exactly what they are. Chris took about 45 minutes. I'd matched with him on a dating app when I was 22. He seemed fine over text funny in that low-effort kind of way. Not pushy, no obvious red flags. I like to meet up pretty quickly after chatting, because you can never really tell until you're sitting across from someone. So we picked a small restaurant, nothing fancy, and set a time. I arrived a few minutes early. He was already there. He tried to give me a fist bump when I walked in. A fist bump? On a first date? I cringed but let it go. We sat down. I told myself to give it a chance. Then he opened his mouth. When I mentioned my job, he grinned and said, "Wow, that's a big role for a woman. You must be one of the smart ones, huh?" My stomach dropped instantly. I shot him a look. Before I could even respond, he was already following it up with something worse, laughing at his own joke like he'd said something brilliant. I told him calmly that his humor wasn't landing. He shrugged, laughed again, doubled down. The jokes kept coming about my job, my hobbies, the way I pronounced certain words. At one point, completely out of nowhere, he asked how many people I'd slept with. Then immediately followed it up with, "You don't seem like the type to sleep around. Good for you," like that was a compliment. I told him the question was inappropriate. He told me I needed to lighten up. By that point, I wasn't just uncomfortable, I was furious. But I was already there, already hungry. And some stubborn part of me refused to let him ruin my evening completely. So I stayed. I ate. I endured. He mocked the meal I ordered, mocked the drink I chose. When I glanced at the dessert menu, he made a comment about my figure. I skipped dessert. Not because of him, because I couldn't wait to leave. Outside, I put on the best fake smile I've ever produced in my life. "Thanks for tonight," I said. "It was interesting getting to know you." My tone could not have been clearer. I hoped it registered. It didn't. He asked how I was getting home. I told him I was walking, it wasn't far, the streets were well lit, I'd be fine. He immediately started in with, "It's not safe for a woman to walk alone." I said I'd be fine. He fell in to step beside me without being invited, like we were suddenly best friends. I already had a plan. There was no way I was letting him know where I actually lived. About 5 minutes from my real address, I turned down a random side street, pointed vaguely at the houses, and said, "This is me." Chris looked pleased with himself, like the whole night had gone great. He gave me a hug, one of those long, awful hugs, where my arms got pinned at my sides. I grimaced through it, muttered goodbye, and waited until he turned and walked away. I watched him until he was completely out of sight. Then I walked to my actual street, my actual front door. I felt relief washing over me with every step. I was already planning to unmatch and block him the second I got inside. My key slid into the lock, and then I heard them. Footsteps, fast, closing in from behind. Panic hit me like a wall. I shoved the door open, and before I could get through it, arms wrapped around me from behind and slammed me sideways into the door frame. The impact threw me off balance. I was half inside, half out, the door swinging wide, my arms pinned, my mind screaming. Hot breath hit my ear. "You didn't think I'd figure out you lied about where you lived, did you?" My blood ran cold. I thought with absolute certainty that this was it, that I was going to die on my own doorstep, that no one was going to hear me scream. And then the grip disappeared. And then came the laughter. Loud, mocking, cruel. I spun around and there he was. Chris, standing under the yellow glow of the streetlight, laughing like he'd just delivered the funniest punchline of his life. He'd followed me, figured out I'd lied. And he thought he genuinely thought that grabbing a woman from behind in the dark and whispering in her ear was a fun way to break the ice. "I thought it would make you laugh," he said. The rage that came out of me was something I didn't know I had. I screamed at him, told him exactly what it means for a woman to be followed home, grabbed, and whispered to in the dark. How reckless it was, how terrifying, how unbelievably stupid. He stood there looking genuinely confused, like I was the unreasonable one. I pointed at the street and screamed at him to leave. He shuffled off muttering, still acting like I'd overreacted. I slammed the door, locked every bolt and chain, and stood in my hallway shaking. My roommates were out of town. The house felt vast and empty, and every small noise made me flinch. I called my mom, then my best friend. I barely slept. I moved out of that place a couple of years later. But Chris stayed in my head much longer than he deserved. If you're reading this, Chris, screw you. I hope I never see your face again. Chris thought cruelty was a punchline. The man in our next story didn't think that at all. He thought cruelty was love. This next submission is one of the hardest we've received. A woman who wants you to hear what 4 years inside a controlled, violent relationship actually feels like from the inside. She asked that we share it exactly as she wrote it. I want to warn you that what I'm about to share involves abuse, control, and things that took me years of therapy to say out loud. I'm stronger now, but I wasn't always. I met Liam when I was a freshman in college. 19 years old, still raw from the end of a bad relationship, and he appeared exactly when I was most vulnerable. We clicked instantly. Within a week, we were official. Within 2 weeks, there was a ring on my finger. I know how that sounds now. I didn't know then. For the first few months, everything felt perfect. He was charming and thoughtful and made me feel like I was living inside a love song. But fairy tales, the real ones, have darkness buried in them. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the darkness started to surface. It started with small things. He'd suggest what I should wear, what I should eat. He'd want me to come with him to things I wasn't interested in, and if I hesitated, he'd frame it as me not caring about him. I told myself he was just attentive, just passionate, just in love with me. Then, he slammed my laptop shut. I was at my desk trying to finish a paper. He came in demanding I go with him to some club meeting he'd decided was important. I said no. He walked over, looked me dead in the eye, and slammed the lid of my laptop on my fingers. I was scared. I went with him. After that, the control tightened, slowly enough that I barely noticed until it was everywhere. What I ate and when, what I wore, and who I talked to. If he wanted something from me, it didn't matter how I felt about it. I lost count of how many times I gave in just to avoid the anger, just to avoid what came after the anger. There was a day at work. A coworker made an offhand joke, asked Liam if he was trying to make me gain weight. And Liam, without missing a beat, without a flicker of shame, looked at her and said, "Yeah, so no one else will want her." I've carried those words ever since. They were the first crack in something that collapsed over years. They were the beginning of a relationship with food and my own body that took therapy to untangle. 4 years. That's how long I stayed. When I finally ended it, when I finally found the words, he came over to collect his things and wrapped his hands around my throat until the edges of my vision started to go dark. I took him back. I know. But fear doesn't work the way people think it does from the outside. After that, the physical violence became routine. The assaults became something I learned to survive by going somewhere else in my mind. He had a look he'd give me in public, just a glance. Nothing anyone around us would register, and I knew exactly what it meant. Keep quiet, or pay for it tonight. Sometimes the punishment was the closet, lights off. I've been terrified of the dark my whole life, and he knew it. The hours I spent in there felt endless. That was the point. The last night, the one that finally broke something open in me, I knew I wouldn't survive another year. With the help of my best friend, someone I owe everything to, I got out. I never went to the police. I had no evidence, no voice, and no confidence that anyone would believe me over him. He had stripped all of that away so carefully, so gradually, that I hadn't even noticed it happening. I'm in therapy now. I'm stronger now. I'm finally able to say this out loud. If any part of this sounds familiar, the suggestions that become demands, the anger that becomes something worse, the slow erosion of who you are, please don't wait for the last night. The red flags are always there first. I just wish I'd let myself see them. She got out. And she is, by any measure, one of the strongest people to ever submit a story to this channel. Most bad dates are just awkward evenings you laugh about later. But the next one is in a category entirely of its own. This submission comes from a woman who went to dinner with a perfectly ordinary man and somehow ended up at the center of a police operation gone catastrophically wrong. I'm going to tell you about a first date that ended with me face down on cold pavement while a German Shepherd barked 6 inches from my head. And the worst part, it wasn't even my fault. It was 2016. I'd matched with a guy named Alex online, not a fireworks situation, no instant chemistry. But we had decent conversation, and he apparently had a mutual connection through my cousin's social circle. After more than a month of chatting, he finally asked me to hang out. His exact message, want to hang out. That was it. No flair, no charm, no effort. I laughed at how bland it was. I said yes anyway. We picked a restaurant in the city, dinner, a walk, maybe back to my place, simple, casual, no pressure. Dinner started well enough. Wine, appetizers, easy small talk. He wasn't setting the world on fire, but he was nice, comfortable, normal. Then he excused himself to use the restroom, and a stranger sat down in his chair. Plain clothes, middle-aged, could have been anybody, an accountant, a dad grabbing takeout. He leaned forward, reached inside his coat, and produced a badge. Leather flip case, official emblem, the whole thing. Chicago Police Department. He looked me directly in the eyes and spoke quietly, like someone who did not want to be overheard. The man you're with is being taken into custody tonight. Stay calm. Do not tip him off. And then he stood up, walked past the front window, and was gone. I sat there. Alex's fork was still resting on his plate. His dessert was half eaten. My wine glass was in my hand, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Was this a prank? Did Alex set this up? Was there a camera somewhere? Or was the man across from me hiding something so enormous that it had followed him into a restaurant on a Tuesday night? Alex wandered back 5 minutes later, sat down, smiled at me, picked up his fork. It was the most surreal moment of my life. I offered to split the check. Didn't give him much of a choice. When we stepped outside into the cool night air, my heart was already racing. We turned left the same direction the undercover cop had walked. 10 minutes of forced small talk. The street quiet, lit by yellow lights, completely ordinary looking. Then headlights exploded into my vision. A black Mercedes screeched to a stop inches behind us. 2 men were out of the car before it fully stopped, guns drawn, voices cutting through the air like blades, hands where we can see them. And then it was everywhere. Police cars converging from both ends of the street, sirens tearing the night apart, officers swarming us from every direction. I counted at least 20 before I stopped counting. Rifles raised, 3 K9 units, the dogs straining forward and snarling. Someone shoved us against a tree in a stranger's front yard. Then we were on our knees. Then we were face down on the cold pavement, hands behind our heads. I could feel the rough ground against my cheek, could hear people screaming instructions all around me. My body was shaking so hard I couldn't have stood up if I'd tried. I kept thinking, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything. Please let that matter. They processed Alex first, ran his ID, then ran it again. Then came the pause, and then the apologies began. Wrong man. The resemblance to the armed robbery suspect they'd been hunting for 20 hours was, they said, uncanny. His ID was clean. He was not who they thought he was. The apologies kept coming. They must have said sorry 100 times. I was hyperventilating so badly by then that when the medics arrived, they thought I was having a heart attack. It wasn't. Just a panic attack. Just my nervous system's completely reasonable response to 20 rifles and 3 dogs. Alex didn't say much afterward. He looked shaken and pale, and I don't blame him. There's not a lot to say when you've just been mistaken for a fugitive on a first date. I never saw him again. Some experiences are too big to just move past with a second coffee. Wrong place, wrong date, wrong night. At least that story had an explanation at the end of it. Our next submission has no such comfort. This one comes from a 23-year-old woman in Seattle who was at one of the lowest points of her life when she opened the door to someone she should never have let inside. To this day, she still doesn't know exactly what happened. And that not knowing is the most terrifying part of all. I want to be upfront about something before I get into this. At the time of this story, I was not in a good place. I'd been through something that landed me in a hospital and then a mental health ward. I was fragile, I was lonely, and I made a decision I should not have made. I'm not proud of it, but I'm sharing it because what happened next was something no one should ever have to piece together from other people's accounts of their own memory. I was 23, living in Seattle. A few months out of the ward, I downloaded a dating app because I wanted warmth and distraction and something that felt like forward motion. I invited men to my apartment instead of meeting in public because that felt safer to me at the time. I matched with a guy named Lucas. He wasn't attractive, overweight, scruffy, the kind of person whose photos were clearly taken in the best possible light years ago. But I wasn't looking for a model. We both liked weed. That was enough. We arranged a mojito and movie night at my place. He said he'd bring joints. When he showed up, he looked worse than his pictures. Oily hair, a stained hoodie, an energy of total flatness. But I felt too lonely to turn him away. I made drinks. We settled on the couch. I picked something to stream. I noticed quickly that he wasn't much of a conversationalist, almost blank, like talking to a wall that occasionally nodded. I kept sipping my mojito, thinking the buzz would loosen things up, make the evening easier. That is the last thing I clearly remember. Everything after that is fragments, darkness, a vague impression of lying in my bed, of lights, of a door slamming. The rest I know because other people told me. I missed a group project meeting the next morning completely out of character. My friends called my phone repeatedly. No answer. They reached out to my older sister, straight to voicemail. So they came to my apartment and buzzed the intercom until they called the fire department. The firefighters got into the building, but not my unit. They banged on the door, shouted my name, until eventually I opened it. I was wrapped in a blanket, clearly naked underneath, completely disoriented. My friend said my eyes were open, but I wasn't really there. The firefighters assumed I was hungover. They left. My friends came inside, that's when they found it. My arms, my legs, my stomach smeared with yellow antiseptic, the kind used in hospitals. I apparently said something about burning myself and treating the wounds, but there were no burns anywhere on my body. And I did not own antiseptic like that. It was not something I had ever bought or kept in my apartment. They took me out of there. I spent the next day barely able to form sentences, my thoughts scattered and slow, like something was still working its way out of my system. My sister said I looked completely checked out. She brought me to her house, worried I might hurt myself again. Then I started to feel pain and bleeding, and that's when she rushed me to the emergency room. The hospital ran every test they could. The staff told me to contact the police. I was referred to a specialist. Over the following week, there were appointments, swabs, blood work, preventative treatments. I filed a report backed by everything my friends and sister had witnessed. The evidence at my apartment was documented: the antiseptic on the sheets, ripped underwear, dried blood smeared on the inside of my front door. The police said there wasn't enough to act on. I have never blacked out like that before. Not from alcohol, not from mixing alcohol with my medication. I have done both stupidly and never lost more than a few hours. I lost 3 days. 3 days that I will never get back and that I cannot account for. No matter how hard I try to reach into that darkness and find something. I don't know what Lucas wanted. I don't know what he did. I don't know what the antiseptic was for or who it was meant to cover. What I know is that I woke up and the evidence of something terrible was written all over my body in a language I still can't fully read. Talking about it doesn't change what happened. But silence felt like letting him win. So here it is. I've always trusted my instincts when something feels off. The problem is, instincts don't always kick in fast enough. Sometimes you're already sitting across from the wrong person before that cold feeling in your stomach finds the words to explain itself. I was 20 when I started dating. Late bloomer, I know. I'd matched with a guy through a Facebook dating group, some distant connection, a friend of a friend of a friend, that kind of thing. His name was Ryan. Tall, messy brown hair, tattoos running up most of his right arm and hand. From our messages, he seemed relaxed, easygoing, no pressure. So we planned to meet at a coffee shop not far from my apartment. Nothing fancy, public place, daytime. All the things you're supposed to do. Ryan was right on time, which I appreciated. He came straight in for a hug and it didn't feel forced, so I didn't mind. We grabbed drinks and pastries and found a table by a big window. The light was streaming in. Everything felt easy. For about the first 10 minutes. Ryan was 23, a little bulkier in person than his photos suggested, wearing a snug t-shirt that left very little to the imagination about how much time he spent at the gym. When I asked about his tattoos, just making conversation, just being polite, he smirked at me and said, "Want to touch one?" I laughed it off, ran my fingers quickly over the ink on his forearm. "They're cool," I said. That's when he flexed. Suddenly and without warning, his arm tensed under my hand, and before I could pull back, he caught my wrist and pressed my palm firmly against his bicep. "Feel how strong I am," he said, grinning. Like this was something I was supposed to find impressive. My mind scrambled. Do I make a scene? Do I stay calm? My gut was screaming that something was wrong, but I was in a coffee shop in broad daylight, and I didn't want to cause a scene over what might just be weird flirting, I told him firmly to let go of my hand. He laughed. And that laugh, I still think about that laugh. It didn't sound right. It sounded like someone doing an impression of a person laughing, hollow and off-pitch, like something performing normalcy rather than actually feeling it. He let go. The air between us went cold and strange. I sipped my coffee and tried to steer us back towards something resembling a normal conversation. I asked again about the tattoos. He ignored the question completely and launched into a speech about working out. How being strong was the most important thing. How everything in life came down to physical power. I laughed nervously and said, "Yeah, I can tell you're into fitness. Just trying to go along with it." He beamed like I'd said exactly the right thing. Then he stopped mid-sentence, looked me dead in the eye, and asked with this strange, demanding intensity, "So what do you think of my muscles?" I felt trapped. I mumbled something about it being cool that he was into fitness. That wasn't enough. He leaned closer and asked again. Same question, same tone, like he needed a specific answer and wasn't going to stop until he got it. I nodded, said sure. His smile stretched just a little too wide, and he took a long, slow sip of his drink, while I sat there trying to figure out how quickly I could leave without making things worse. I started glancing at the clock. I fantasized about fake emergency phone calls. I tried shifting the conversation to work, to hobbies, to literally anything else. He leaned back in his chair and told me casually, like it was completely normal first date conversation, that he was into girls who worship his muscles. His exact words: worship. And the way he said it, not joking, not self-deprecating, not even slightly aware of how it sounded, made my skin crawl. I forced a laugh and made the mistake of asking how he'd figured that out about himself. That question opened a door I immediately wished I hadn't touched. He launched into a detailed explanation that I will not repeat here, and by the end of it, I was already standing up, bag in hand, telling him I needed to use the restroom. He noticed me taking my things, didn't say a word, just watched. I locked the bathroom door and called my mom. Her advice was simple: be honest. Say you're not feeling it. Leave. I stood in that bathroom for far too long, overthinking, talking myself into and out of various exit strategies. When I finally stepped out, he was sitting perfectly still, staring directly at the bathroom door. He'd been watching it the whole time. I forced a sheepish smile and told him I wasn't feeling well. Blamed the milk in my coffee. He nodded like he believed me or like he didn't care either way. He walked me to the bus stop. Just as I thought I was safely out of reach, he leaned in for a kiss. I turned my head so fast, it probably looked like I'd been startled by a car. The second I was on the bus, I blocked him on everything. And I made a mental note to never again ask a strange man about his tattoos. Ryan was obsessed with how he looked on the outside. The man in our next story was obsessed with something far more dangerous possession. This submission comes from a woman who'd been warned about her boyfriend before the relationship even began. She didn't listen. And one night, in the dark of her bedroom, she found out exactly what her friends already knew. You'll want to hold on to something for this one. My name is Mia, and about 12 years ago, I dated a man I'll call Jake. We were in our early 20s. The relationship lasted about 6 months, which is honestly 6 months longer than it should have. My friends had warned me, they told me he was controlling, manipulative, not what he seemed. But he was so sweet around me, so attentive, that I brushed every warning off like lint off a jacket. Jake had his quirks. Whenever we went out, bars, clubs, anywhere with other people, if another man so much as glanced in my direction, Jake would tense up. His hand would find mine or his arm would slide around my shoulders, and the grip was always just slightly too firm, claiming territory. I told myself it was just protectiveness, that he loved me and didn't want to lose me. I made excuses the way people in love do. But then the demands for my time started. Guilt trips when I wanted an evening to myself. That suffocating feeling of someone needing to account for every hour you weren't with them. After about 7 months, I was exhausted in a way I couldn't quite name. Now I need to tell you about Alex, my best friend since 6th grade. We grew up practically as siblings. Our families were close. We walked to school together, spent weekends at each other's houses, the whole thing. I'd known Alex was gay long before he told anyone else, and I was right beside him when he came out to his parents in high school. Years later, he moved out of state for college, got married to his partner, and I stood beside him at the wedding as his best woman. I later made him godfather to my daughter. That's the kind of friendship we had. Around the time I was with Jake, one of our mutual friends died suddenly. I was devastated. I told Jake I needed space, no calls, no texts, no visits, just time to grieve. Alex, being Alex, dropped everything, booked a last-minute flight, and showed up at my door that same night. The funeral was early the next morning. It was too late for him to get a hotel, and sharing a bed was something we'd done since we were kids, without a second thought. Our parents used to joke about it. I didn't tell Jake he was coming. I didn't think I needed to. I drifted off quickly that night, exhausted from grief. Sometime in the deep, dark hours of the middle of the night, I felt something brushing against my face. Gentle at first, like a breath. Then, a blinding light hit my eyes and I heard his voice, Jake's voice. You know I could kill you both right now and no one would even know I was here. I went absolutely still. He was standing over the bed holding a gun, his face twisted with something between fury and satisfaction. My bedroom's at the back of the house. Far from the front door, I still have no idea how he got in without making a sound. He looked down at Alex and sneered. What about you? Do you like stealing other people's women? I jumped in immediately. Jake, I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. Shut up. This is Alex, the friend I've told you about 100 times. He wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Alex, sizing him up, this man who was barely 5'3" and maybe 125 pounds, sitting in my bed in the middle of the night while Jake stood over us with a gun. Alex, to his absolute credit, did not flinch. Dude, Alex said, you have no idea what you're talking about. I'm gay. I'm married. Jake laughed, shook his head like he'd heard the oldest lie in the world. Look at his phone, I said. Check his pictures, his texts. You'll see. Jake hesitated. Then he snatched Alex's phone off the nightstand and started scrolling. I watched his jaw tighten with every swipe. Whatever he was seeing, it wasn't giving him what he wanted to find. Finally, he hurled the phone across the room. It hit the wall and shattered. Guess what, he said, his voice dropping low and slow. You being just saved your lives. I was shaking with fury. Get out of my house, I said. Jake sauntered over to me like this was all tremendously amusing. As he passed, he leaned down and kissed my neck, his hand gripping the back of my head in a way that froze every muscle in my body. Then he whispered against my ear. It's handy, you know, having an uncle who's a locksmith. He stepped back, pointed the gun at me like a finger. Pow, he said, then walked out laughing, his footsteps echoing down the hallway and out into the dark. The next day, I filed for a restraining order. Jake violated it more times than I could count before the police finally arrested him. After he got out, he moved on, left me alone. I heard later, through people who still knew him, that Jake was in a maximum security prison, attempted murder, multiple counts of assault with a deadly weapon, assaulting a police officer badly enough to put him in the hospital, illegal firearms, drugs. Sometimes I think about that night and how many inches it was from going a completely different direction. If I'd listened to my friends, if I'd trusted the grip that was always just slightly too firm, the red flags were there from the very first night. I just kept looking away from them. Jake wanted control over everything he could see. The man in our next story had a different kind of obsession, not with another person, but with himself. And what started as a strange living situation turned into one of the most viscerally terrifying moments of waking up in the wrong place at the wrong time. This submission comes from a woman in her early 20s who thought the scariest thing about that night would be the Uber fare. A few years ago, I was 23 and deep in what I can only describe as my avoidance era. I wasn't ready to face getting older. Not in any dramatic way, I just had this creeping, borderline obsessive dread about time passing, about youth slipping away, and instead of dealing with it, I threw myself into dating, kept myself distracted, kept moving. One of the guys I met during that stretch was named Caleb. He had an unusual living situation. He shared his house with his grandfather. When he explained that his parents were gone and he was the old man's primary caretaker, it made sense in a sad sort of way. Sweet, even. I didn't think much about it. The grandfather was never around during any of our early hangouts, so he barely registered as real to me, more like a background detail. The night everything changed, we'd been out drinking. Not recklessly, just enough tipsy, giddy, the kind of loose and laughing that makes 2 a.m. feel like a perfectly reasonable time to share a ride back to his place. The fare nearly cleared my account, but I didn't care. We were infatuated and warm, and the night felt electric. Caleb's house was unremarkable from the outside. One-story, quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that looks the same as every third house on the block. He dug a key out from under the doormat, which should probably have been my first warning sign about his security instincts, and let us in. The hallway light was on, dim and yellowish, the kind left on more out of habit than intention. The driveway was empty. The house was quiet. We went straight to his room. One thing led to another. I'll spare you the specifics, you don't need that imagery. What I will say is that Caleb was good company, and I had absolutely no complaints about how the evening was going. Afterward, I was thirsty. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs to the kitchen for a glass of water. Caleb followed, offered food, played the gracious host at whatever ungodly hour it was. I drank my water, rinsed the glass, put it on the rack, upside down the way my mother taught me, and headed back upstairs while he stayed in the kitchen, doing whatever it is men do in refrigerators at 3 a.m. The house upstairs was quiet. Dark in every direction except for the residual glow from the kitchen below and the light still spilling out of Caleb's room. I was tired, pleasantly so, and I climbed back into bed, turned off the lamp, and was asleep within minutes. I'm not someone who startles easily. My mom always said I had the street awareness of a very friendly golden retriever. I just never sensed danger until it was already in the room. That night, she was proven right again. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when the noise pulled me out of it. A faint shuffling, coming from the foot of the bed. I lay there for a moment in that half-awake haze, assuming it was Caleb moving around, getting ready to climb in beside me. I squeezed my eyes shut and waited. The shuffling didn't stop. It got closer. And then something cold touched my ankle. I came out of that bed like a live wire, scrambled backward against the headboard, with my heart exploding in my chest, and looked toward the foot of the bed, and there he was. Standing completely naked at the end of the bed, skin pale and loose in the dim light, staring at me with an expression I cannot properly describe, was a man who had to be pushing 90 years old. I screamed, not a little yelp of surprise. A full, primal, blood-curdling scream that I'm sure woke up at least 3 neighboring households. I didn't think I just moved. I threw myself off the bed, shoved past the old man, and bolted into the dark hallway with my heart so loud in my ears I could barely hear anything else. Caleb came thundering up the stairs before I made it 3 steps. His face cycled through shock, alarm, and then something I can only describe as exhausted resignation. The look of someone who has been through a version of this before and was hoping tonight wouldn't be the night it happened again. He didn't need me to explain. He just turned and went into the bedroom. I stood at the top of the stairs, back against the wall, trying to get my breathing under control. From down the hallway, I could hear the old man's voice, thin and confused, repeating the same question over and over. Where's the girl? The girl. Who's the girl? Where's the girl? It took Caleb 15 minutes to get his grandfather dressed and back to his own room. 15 minutes of that voice drifting through the walls while I stood in the hallway trying very hard not to think about cold fingers on my ankle in the dark. When Caleb came back, he told me it was all clear and looked at me with this expression caught somewhere between apologetic and mortified. I didn't say much. I went back to the room, threw on every piece of clothing I could locate at speed, grabbed my shoes and my bag, drank another glass of water for the road, and walked out the front door without looking back. I blocked Caleb on every platform before my Uber arrived. I have been in haunted houses. I have watched every horror movie the genre has to offer. I have been startled by strangers, by strange noises, by things that go bump in genuinely unsettling ways. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever come close to the specific primal terror of waking up in a dark room to find something cold on your ankle and an old man standing naked at the foot of someone else's bed. I still can't think about it without my stomach turning, and I probably never will. Some encounters leave you shaken for an evening. Others follow you for years. The next story comes from a woman who was just trying to get through a night shift. She matched with someone on Tinder before work, thought nothing of it, and then spent the rest of that night trapped behind a front desk with nowhere to go and no one to call. What she describes as a slow, deliberate escalation, and the moment it crossed a line she will never forget. I used to work the night shift at a small motel chain in the South. 10 at night until 7 in the morning, alone at the front desk, with nothing but bad lighting and the occasional strange guest to keep me company. I was 25. I thought I'd seen everything the night had to offer. I hadn't. It was an evening like any other. I had some time to kill before my shift started. So I was scrolling through Tinder the way you do when you're bored and vaguely hopeful. I matched with a guy who had a punk goth vibe dark aesthetic, into Ouija boards and tarot cards, the kind of profile that immediately caught my attention. We messaged back and forth for a bit, easy conversation, nothing that set off any alarms. I told him I had to get ready for work. He seemed cool. I thought nothing more of it. That night was also my first time working completely alone. No manager in the back, no colleague to flag down, just me and the empty lobby and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Around midnight, a man walked through the front doors and asked for me by name. I looked up from the desk and felt that strange, tilting sensation of seeing someone out of context. He looked familiar. I couldn't immediately place him. Then it clicked. It was the guy from Tinder. My stomach dropped before I fully understood why. He explained it casually. He'd seen I was nearby on the app and figured he'd come check if I worked here. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that he had a room at this motel. That was the second the lobby stopped feeling safe. For the next 2 hours, he stood at my desk and talked. At first it seemed manageable strange, but manageable. He wasn't aggressive, just present in that suffocating way where you keep hoping they'll get tired and leave, but they never do. Then the conversation started drifting. His ex-girlfriend, fights he'd been in. What he wanted to do with me, phrased as casually as a weather forecast. I was behind the counter with nowhere to go, no protocol for the situation, and no idea how to make him leave without making things worse. Eventually, around 2 or 3 in the morning, he said he was heading back to his room. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. I stepped outside for a cigarette. I needed the air, needed 30 seconds of something resembling normal, and lit up in the quiet dark of the parking lot. I heard footsteps behind me before I saw him. He'd followed me out. I kept my face neutral and my voice steady as he came up beside me, standing closer than he had any right to. He told me more about himself, an artist in town for a mural project, not local. That detail burrowed into the back of my mind and stayed there. Not local. No one who knew him within reach. I asked if he wanted to smoke and pointed out a spot away from the entrance, hoping distance would help. Instead of walking toward it, he turned, leaned in, pressed his face against my neck, and inhaled, then grabbed me. I shoved him off before the shock fully registered and told him that if he touched me again, I would make sure he regretted it. My hands were shaking as I stamped out my cigarette. I grabbed my phone and turned toward the building, already composing what I was going to say to my manager. He snatched the phone out of my hand. I froze. He was smiling. He opened my contacts, found his own number in my recent messages from our earlier chat, and texted himself from my phone, just like that. He had my number. He handed the phone back. The first message came through almost immediately. I looked down at the screen and felt the blood drain from my face. It was an image. Graphic, heavily modified, the kind of thing that takes effort to produce and exists for no purpose other than to make someone feel violated just by seeing it. Then another. Then another. My phone kept lighting up, each message worse than the last, each one captioned with something that made my hands shake harder. I can't wait to try this on you. You know where to find me. I was telling myself to breathe, to think, to do something, when the last message came through, a video. Every instinct I had told me not to open it. I opened it anyway. I won't describe what was in it. I will only say that it was violent, it was sexual, and it was the kind of content that doesn't leave you. It lives somewhere behind your eyes and shows up in unguarded moments for years afterward. I walked to the back office on legs that barely felt like mine, locked the door, and sat on the floor and cried until I couldn't anymore. The texts kept coming for days. I couldn't make myself block him. I couldn't make myself call the police. I just froze, the way prey freezes. Eventually, I told my manager everything. To his credit, he acted immediately, had the man removed from the property, banned him permanently, flagged his company to prevent any future bookings. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. I should have called the police that night. I know that. But fear has a way of making the obvious impossible, and I was alone at 2 a.m. with a man who already knew where I worked, what I looked like, and that no one else was coming. I think about that parking lot sometimes, the cigarette, the footsteps behind me. The moment just before the hand on my neck when I still thought the worst part of the night was already over. It wasn't. It was only just beginning. There are dates that go badly. There are dates that go very badly. And then there's what happened to me, a college junior, 3rd year, perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening, which ended with me pressed flat against a stranger's lawn while armed men in suits walked calmly out of a restaurant and left 7 bodies behind them. I need you to understand that I did not know any of this was coming. I want that on the record. It was about 6 years ago. I was single, my roommates had been on my case about it for weeks, and one night I finally gave in and swiped through Tinder just to get them off my back. I matched with a girl I should mention here, that I'm a woman too, and she was, without exaggeration, stunning. The kind of profile you don't expect to actually match with. Slim, curvy, the kind of face that makes you check twice to make sure the account is real. We started chatting immediately, and she didn't waste time. It was clear within the first few messages what she was interested in, and I was absolutely on the same page. We decided to meet at a hotel the first time. It went well. Better than well, honestly. It became our regular spot. I paid for everything, I had a part-time job, and the money was tight, but it was manageable until the timing got awkward. There was one stretch where she got in touch right before payday, and I had to tell her no. That's when she suggested something that threw me completely off balance. She invited me to her parents' house. I wasn't ready for that. I didn't think we were anywhere near the meet the family stage, and the whole idea made me deeply uncomfortable. But she insisted, said I could sneak in late at night, around 9, that her parents would be asleep, that no one would notice. I hesitated for a long time. The whole thing felt strange, but I said yes. Because I was young and foolish, and the hotel memories were very persuasive. She gave me the address. It was about a 15-minute walk from the train station, out in the countryside near Gunma, the kind of area where the houses are spread apart, and the streets are quiet enough that your footsteps sound loud. When I arrived, the neighborhood had this empty, slightly eerie quality, lots of dark windows, that particular stillness of a place where people go to bed early. Getting into her room involved climbing to a 2nd-floor window, which felt like something out of a bad spy movie. But once I was inside, everything seemed normal. Pink walls, shelves full of plush toys, the comfortable chaos of a room someone had grown up in. She met me with a whisper. My parents are asleep in the next room. Don't make a sound. They wake up around 6, so you'll need to leave before then. I brushed off the nerves. What followed was, as expected, excellent. The added element of sneaking around made everything feel charged and a little reckless, in a way that was more fun than frightening. Afterward, I wanted a cigarette. Climbing back out the window didn't appeal to me, so I cracked it open instead and leaned toward the gap. She hated smoking and made that clear, but I promised to blow it outside. That's when I heard the voice, high-pitched, close, coming from somewhere just beyond the bedroom door. "I'll kill you." Then footsteps, fast and purposeful, heading straight toward us. She went rigid. Her eyes went wide with a fear that was not performative, not exaggerated. It was the real thing. She grabbed my arm and hissed, "Hide right now. You'll die if they find you." There were tears in her eyes. Her voice was shaking. My heart rate doubled in an instant. I looked around the room. There was only one option. I slipped into the closet and pulled the door as quietly as I could behind me, pressing myself back against the hanging clothes, slowing my breathing down to almost nothing. Not 2 seconds later, the bedroom door slammed open. Her mother's voice cut through the room like something sharp. "Are you smoking again?" "So what if I am?" she shot back. Defiant, but I could hear the tremor underneath it. "You know the rules. You're not even 21. Your father will lose it if he smells smoke in the house. I won't do it again. Just leave me alone." A pause. I stood absolutely still in the dark, my back against the wall, willing myself not to breathe. For a moment, I thought it was going to be fine. I thought the mother was going to turn around and walk out, and I would have a very amusing story to tell someday about hiding in a girl's closet. Then I shifted my weight, just a fraction. Just enough that my heel lost traction, and the back of my head made the softest, most devastating contact with the wall behind me. A dull thud, not loud. Catastrophically loud. The room went silent. Who's in there? The footsteps moved toward me. I heard the bedroom door open, heard her step outside, and then the footsteps came back, louder, determined. The closet door ripped open. I stood there in nothing but my underwear, blinking in the sudden light, looking at a woman whose expression contained approximately 0 surprise and 100% cold fury. "Who the hell are you?" she said. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. That's when I noticed what she was holding. Not a regular hammer, a mini sledgehammer. Heavy, brutal. The kind of thing that belongs on a construction site and absolutely not in a family home at 10 o'clock at night. "Get out now," she said. Her voice was completely level. "If you don't, you won't make it out alive." I did not need her to repeat herself. I grabbed my clothes off the floor and ran, pulled my jeans on while moving down the hallway, took the stairs in 3 steps, and did not stop until I was outside and moving fast toward the train station with my shoes still in my hand. It was the middle of the night. The first train wasn't for hours. I sat on a bench in that empty station and replayed everything, too wired and too frightened to even think about sleeping. When I finally got home, I sent her a message. More out of guilt than anything else. Her reply made the blood drain out of my face. "Don't worry about it," she said. "I'm just glad my dad didn't wake up. He's in a gang. He doesn't like meeting my boyfriends. One time he took a guy for a drive and I never saw him again. Hope he doesn't find you." She ended it with a laughing emoji. I deleted the app that same morning. A sledgehammer and a laughing emoji. If that isn't a sign to log off dating apps forever, I don't know what is. But the next story starts not with a dramatic encounter, it starts with a slow burn. A woman, a Tinder match, and a week of conversations that felt slightly off, in ways she couldn't quite name. She almost talked herself out of trusting her instincts. Almost. This is her account of what happened when she stopped ignoring the feeling that something was very, very wrong. I downloaded Tinder reluctantly, if I'm being honest. Meeting people in person always felt more natural to me. But a friend had met her fiance on there, and I figured one app wasn't going to hurt. I matched with someone I'll call A. From the first conversation, there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Nothing I could point at directly. Just a frequency that felt slightly off, like a radio station almost tuned in, but not quite. On our second day of talking, she sent lengthy messages about deeply personal things. Her last one said, "Did I scare you off?" I made a voice note to a friend asking if it was just me, or if that seemed like a lot for a stranger to unload. My friend agreed it was. I replied anyway. Over the next week, the pattern continued. She brought up her ex constantly. She complimented me in a way that felt less like appreciation and more like strategy, relentless, escalating, the kind of flattery that starts to feel like pressure. On the second day, she asked for my number. I told her I wasn't ready yet. She didn't take that well. She said, "Ask me anything," as if answering questions was a substitute for the time and trust she was trying to skip past. I should mention here I'm a woman too. A had moved to the country from abroad because her parents couldn't accept her being gay. She was estranged from her mother, she told me, who lived overseas and had cut her off entirely. I filed that detail away. By day 5, she asked for my number again. I gave it to her this time, telling myself I was being too guarded, too shaped by old experiences. The second I sent it, she texted me, "I really hope you don't regret this." I felt a small chill rid it. I ignored the chill. The very next day, she told me she wanted to take me out. I said I wasn't sure. She told me we'd been talking long enough and it was time to meet her phrasing, her timeline, her decision apparently already made. I had this gnawing, specific feeling that agreeing would be a mistake. Not paranoia, not anxiety. Something quieter and more certain than either of those things. I told myself I was overthinking. I said we could meet on a Saturday. She locked in the following Saturday within minutes, suggested coffee and a walk. It felt rushed in a way that made the back of my neck prickle, but I stayed the course. Then, she insisted on driving to meet me a 2-hour trip, she said, despite the fact that her Tinder profile listed her as living only an hour away. When I suggested meeting halfway, she ignored me entirely. Said she'd come straight to where I lived. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that. The pushiness had been building all week, and now it had an edge to it, something that felt less like eagerness and more like a schedule I wasn't aware I'd agreed to. Then she mentioned coming to my house after coffee. I told her no, said I wasn't okay with that. What she said next is something I still think about. "Well, when I sleep with you, it has to be at your place. I share a bed with my mom right now." I read that twice. I sat with the phone in my hand, trying to process what I was feeling. Not just the crudeness of it, not just the assumption that we were going to sleep together at all, but the detail about her mother. The mother she had told me was overseas. The mother who had cut her off and wanted nothing to do with her. That mother. She was currently sharing a bed with her. I called my best friend and told her everything. My friend had been saying for days that I wasn't overreacting, that if something felt wrong, it probably was. When I got to the part about the comment and the mother, she went quiet for a moment and then burst out laughing, not because it was funny, but because it was so brazenly, bewilderingly contradictory that laughter was the only reasonable response. I knew then that I was done. I blocked A on everything and didn't respond to her last message. The next morning, I woke up to a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was A, asking what she'd done to deserve being ignored. I spent 5 days going back and forth. I hate ghosting. It feels cowardly. And I'd rather be honest even when it's uncomfortable. Eventually, I unblocked her and sent a message explaining carefully, clearly everything that had made me uncomfortable. Her response arrived quickly. First of all, she said, "I've never been violent toward women. I'm not aggressive." Wrestling with my aunt was just a joke. I had not mentioned anything about violence. I had not asked about her aunt. She then told me the problem wasn't her behavior. It was me moving too slowly, that it was absurd I didn't want to meet her, that I had issues, that she wasn't using me for sex, but also that sex wasn't a big deal and there was no reason to wait since she already liked me. Then she compared me to her toxic ex who had cheated on her for 2 years. "You're just like him," she said. "I stayed because I'm a loyal person." She was calling me toxic for not wanting to sleep with someone who had steamrolled every boundary I'd tried to set, lied about her own mother, and just casually mentioned she wasn't violent toward women before I'd asked. I sent one final message saying I wouldn't be in contact again. She replied, "Don't be too hard on yourself." I blocked her. That was the end of it. But I think about what would have happened if I'd met her, if I'd let her come to my home, if I'd kept ignoring that quiet, persistent feeling that something was not right. Trust that feeling. It knows things your brain is still catching up to. She trusted her instincts and she got out. The person in our next story trusted someone he thought he knew and spent 5 months discovering exactly how wrong he was. This submission comes from a man whose relationship ended with a text message and whose ex-boyfriend's response to that text message started with tears and ended with a razor blade on the front porch. It was the summer of 2023 when I met him on Instagram. We dated for about 5 months, and I knew from fairly early on that things were wrong the way he pushed past boundaries I'd set, the pressure for intimacy that never let up, the constant cycling between sulking and sweetness whenever I didn't give him what he wanted. I ended it by text. I know that's not ideal. I know it would have been better to do it in person, but I want you to understand that by the time I sent that message, I was already exhausted from managing his reactions, and I genuinely didn't know what an in-person conversation would produce. I found out anyway. That Friday night, without a single call or message warning me, he appeared at my apartment door. Said he just wanted to clear the air. I didn't want to seem cruel, so I let him in, thinking we could resolve things quickly and cleanly, and that would be that. It was not that. What started as an awkward and uncomfortable conversation escalated within minutes into a full argument. He kept swinging between blaming me for everything and acting as though we were about to reconcile, like the breakup was just a misunderstanding we were going to laugh about. One of the core reasons I'd ended things was his complete inability to respect my physical boundaries. He'd pushed for intimacy constantly, and standing there in my apartment watching him try to stroke my hair and whisper at me, I felt a revulsion I couldn't contain. By 10 that night, I told him it was time to leave. He refused. We argued for another 3 hours. By 1 in the morning, I was so tired I could barely hold my own thoughts together. He sat on my couch crying, gripping my waist like a child, begging me to give him one more chance. When I pulled away, he started hitting himself in the face. Hard, repeatedly, screaming, "I'm so stupid," between blows, while I stood there not knowing whether to call someone or run. By 2 in the morning, I finally managed to get him out the door. He sat down on my porch and started wailing. I'm not being dramatic wailing, the kind of raw and animal sound that carries down a quiet residential street and makes your neighbor's lights come on. I stood inside with my back against the door and waited for it to stop. Then I looked through the curtains. He had pulled a razor from somewhere on his person and was drawing it across his thigh, slowly, deliberately. His jeans were darkening with blood in slow spreading patches. He stood up, staggered back to my door, and left red smears on the frame as he knocked. He said he needed bandages, said he'd leave if I helped him. My hands were shaking as I went to the first aid kit. I opened the door the smallest possible gap, threw the kit through it, and slammed it shut again. Then I locked every lock I had and stood in the hallway, listening to him on the other side of the door, crying and pressing whatever bandage he'd found against his leg. He sat on that porch for another hour, crying that sound, that specific relentless sound. I should have called the police, I know that. I didn't because he had a record and I felt sorry for him, which I understand. Looking back was exactly the mechanism that had kept me in that relationship for 5 months too long. The same instinct that made me open the door instead of calling for help. Eventually the crying stopped. Eventually his footsteps moved away. Eventually the street was quiet again. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the silence and thought about the blood on my door frame, and about how much worse the last 5 months could have been, and about how lucky I was that it ended on my porch and not somewhere I couldn't control. Some people perform their pain for an audience, and some of those people will do absolutely anything to make sure you keep watching. That story ended on a porch. The next one started in a school hallway and followed a woman for years into her home, onto every platform, through every attempt to simply move forward with her life. This submission comes from someone who thought she had a best friend. What she actually had was someone quietly, obsessively, building a claim on her that she never agreed to. This is her account of what happens when you try to set a boundary with someone who has already decided you don't get to have one. T and I met in elementary school. We hit it off almost immediately the way kids do when they're 7, and the only qualification for friendship is that someone makes you laugh at lunch. Over the years, we stayed close. Same middle school, same high school, the kind of friendship that gets so familiar it stops feeling like a choice and just feels like weather. My parents liked him. He was over at our house constantly and nobody thought twice about it. To me, T was just my best friend, my companion, the person I told things to. I didn't realize for a long time that he was keeping score. When I started dating someone, the first real relationship of my teenage years, I was nervous telling T. I didn't know why exactly. I just had this vague sense that the news might land strangely. I told him anyway over lunch one day, tried to keep it casual, watched his face for a reaction. His face gave me nothing. Neutral, unbothered, or so it seemed. That afternoon, he put his fist through a classroom window. I told myself it was unrelated. I was young and I didn't want the alternative to be true, so I chose the more comfortable explanation and moved on. T's behavior changed after that in ways that were easy to dismiss individually, but impossible to ignore collectively. He started waiting outside my classes, lingering at my locker, falling into step beside me every morning and every afternoon without being asked, a shadow I hadn't hired. The calls and texts started shortly after every night, multiple messages, and if I didn't respond quickly enough, more messages, then more, each one with a slightly higher frequency of desperation underneath it. Looking back, I was feeding something I should have been starving. I kept responding because I didn't want to hurt him. I told myself that was kindness. It wasn't. It was avoidance, dressed up as compassion. Then came the morning I pulled back my curtain and found him standing on my lawn. It was barely past sunrise. He was just standing there in the gray morning light, looking up at my window, still, patient, like he'd been there for a while. That was the morning I finally said something. I found him at the school gate the next day, just like always, and I made myself do it. "Hey, T," I said. "You know I have a boyfriend now. Maybe we should have a bit of space between us." I have never seen a face change the way his did in that moment. The neutrality evaporated. What replaced it was fury, not hot and explosive, but something tighter and more controlled that was somehow worse. "I've been there for you all this time," he said, his voice rising. "I know you better than he ever could. I care about you more than anyone. So why him? Why not me?" Before I could find the words to respond, he lunged forward and tried to pull me into a hug. I stepped back just in time, my heart hammering, and whatever I'd been planning to say completely left me. After that, there was nowhere my boyfriend and I could go without T appearing. The mall, coffee shops, the park, he didn't try to hide it, and he didn't pretend it was coincidence. When my boyfriend came to my house, T would ring the doorbell over and over until someone answered or until he simply got tired. One afternoon when my parents were out and it was just the two of us inside, I heard heavy thuds against the front door. He was trying to force it open. Then came the rumors at school. Lies about my boyfriend cheating, skipping classes, things designed to corrode the relationship from the outside, since T couldn't get at it from within. When it became clear that wasn't working either, he stopped coming to school altogether, stopped applying to college. Like my happiness was the only project that had ever mattered to him. And when it became unavailable, everything else became pointless. When I left for college, the harassment shifted online. Fake accounts, random usernames, messages that had a texture I recognized even without a name attached. I learned to block anything that felt familiar. Right before I left town, I heard through people who still knew him that T had ended up in some kind of institution. I don't know if it's true. I can't verify it. Part of me hopes it isn't because he was my best friend once. And I'd rather believe that the person who laughed with me at lunch for years is somewhere living a quiet life and not somewhere being managed. But the other part of me keeps my online profiles minimal. No addresses, no workplace, no location tags. If he was that relentless as a teenager, I have absolutely no desire to find out what he became. Every single person in these stories did one thing right. They survived long enough to tell me about it. Not everyone gets that chance. Thank you for spending your night with me and with their stories. If this video found you, maybe it was a reminder. Trust the gut feeling. Question the charming stranger. And for the love of everything, stop ignoring the red flags. I'm Creepy Nick. Subscribe if you want more true stories from the dark corners of human experience. And until next time, stay safe out there. Someone might be counting on it.